So, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, colleagues, friends, students, former students, I greet you all and thank for coming for this unique occasion when I can introduce you, Professor Siegfried Zielinski, and the university will provide him Doctor and Professor Honoris Causa title, which didn't happen since many years at the Hungarian University of Fine Art. Sorry for this paper, but English is not my native language, and as we know each other since more than 20 years, I do not want to be too long and want to be focused. That's why, however I can see, I will use sometimes this paper. Once I made an introduction for Siegfried Zielinski in Berlin at the second Replace conference, but I started with a partly personal remark, and it was full of other personal remarks. Around in 1990, I was in Frankfurt lecturing in a film museum, and in a bookshop I found a fantastic yellow volume. The title was Zur Geschichte des Videorekorders. It was published in 1986, and it became clear that it was Siegfried Zielinski doctoral thesis, and I never saw such a comprehensive overview what the video recorder is. So I bought it and learned his name. Some years later, I was happy enough to invite him in 1996 to the Butterfly Effect show, and also to be the founding member of CQ, Center for Culture and Communication International Advisory Board. Or more than 20 years relationship is full of accidental and not accidental coincidences. However, now I want to point out some more general facts in the context what we should know, and thanks to Professor Siegfried Zielinski. Back to Replace. It was his proposition to replace the boring and odd term of media history to media archaeology, which is now in generally common term, and he proved in several articles and lectures and books, but we do surveying in the deep time of the media. The seminal book, The Deep Time of the Media towards an archaeology of hearing, seeing by technical means, published by the MIT Press, is known also in Hungary. We have also in the university library. The Audivisione, the book which is available also in Hungarian, here is the proof. He analyzed a parallel way the audio-visual apparatuses, namely the film and television, as the interludes or entr'actes of history. In 1999 it was in a flourishing period, but now it is clearly visible that these media suddenly both disappeared. So this parallelism, this survey gave a new approach how we have to consider what media theory, media archaeology should provide us for a better understanding of our presence. The variantology ontology. This is something with which he took a risk. These 5 volumes which focus on the deep time of the art, sciences and technologies to establish global media archaeological excursions and excavations to explore exceptional international networks before the era of globalization with new methods and terminology. These are no unique volumes, which covers not only Europe, but the Middle East, Far East, China, and the intersection in between the historical cultural tendencies and the cooperation and the flow of thinking and inventions. As the curator of the Wilhelm Flüsser exhibition, which is after Karlsruhe, Berlin, The Hague, opened recently in Prague, we do hope we may bring it here as Wilhelm Flüsser, who was lecturing in 1990 in Budapest, and he has several fans and readers in Hungary, is known in Budapest. But we also should thank to Siegfried Zielinski the International Wilhelm Flüsser Archive, which was established in Cologne, and with him moved to Berlin to the UDK. Finally, some words about his academic innovations, especially because the term academic freedom is now a very important term in Hungary at present day. And the academic freedom and the academic innovations are exceptionally important in those serious circumstances. He was the founding rector of the Academy of Media Arts in Cologne, which development went parallel to several international institutional innovations, and also parallel to the establishment of the intermediate department in our university. HFG, the Hochschule für Gestaltung in Karlsruhe, where he is rector at present, organized recently a fantastic and innovative conference about future visions of art education. From today, the lectures are online, thanks to the colleagues from Karlsruhe, so you can watch these series. The parallel strategies, and here it worth to mention that we have not only parallel but cooperative strategies. The HFG and the Hungarian University of Fine Art has a common European research project, Imagine, which can be a starting point for further research and contracts in terms of Erasmus and other European projects. We may remember for a while some friends, his fantastic lecture together with Anthony Moore and Dietmar Kamper happened with the title Trialogue in the Perspective Conference, and he was present in 2009. We presented this book in Hungarian, where the Werner Necker's collection was available for the Hungarian audience. So, dear Siegfried, thank you for accepting the title and also the invitation, and it is a pleasure for us that you are here in present, and now it is your turn. I ask you to start the lecture, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, dear Miklós. It might be strange for you that somebody who is not so young anymore is nervous in such a situation, but I definitely am nervous. I made all the academic examinations you can do, and I think I had I don't know how many doctoral students by myself, and a lot of habilitations and so on. But now to get this wonderful Auszeichnung, this wonderful honorary doctorship and professorship is something very special for me. And of course, at first I would like to thank Miklós and all the colleagues and friends who were supporting that. Very honestly, if we can turn off these lights here, because I will need this quite a lot, and I can read my notes. I'm both grateful and at the same time, Miklós knows this perspective from which I'm speaking when I'm talking about archaeology of art and media. I'm ashamed because I always had and have a very special relation to those countries who are named by those who are living in the west of Europe, Eastern Europe, and you know how many misunderstandings are connected with that. I'm ashamed because I know from my research that according to Hegel, the West was not developing the East, but it's the other way around. The East was developing the West, and this is relevant not only for the whole world, the relation between the Orient and Europe, it's also relevant for Europe itself in a very special way. I remember very well our visits together, Miklós, in different cities, in Prague, also in Budapest. If we had time during the conferences, we were going to the technical museums, and I was listening to your stories, looking at all these machines which I thought are coming from the West, but they were invented in Budapest, in Warsaw, in St. Petersburg, and so on. And I learned a lot through the decades. So I could have easily dedicated, for example, my lecture for tonight to, sorry if I'm not pronouncing him correct, to György Kepes, for example, who, as many of you know, was the founder of the Center of Advanced Visual Studies at the MIT in Boston in the 1960s. His most famous book, The Language of Vision, he wrote already, published in 1944, and he initiated and was leading this model institute for most of the institutes which came afterwards in the 1970s, 80s and 90s all over the world. But I also could have dedicated this lecture to Joseph Tully, for example. I fell over him 10, 15 years or perhaps even more years ago when I found documents in various bits and pieces, amongst them an article on his opera which was performed in 1796 in Pest, which was called Der Telegraph oder die Fernschreibmaschine, the telegraph or a machine with which you can write into distance, 1796. With the help of Miklós, I got some of the documents additionally, and I was able to research him more narrowly. I think up to nowadays he's still quite a wide landscape in media history and in art history, and it would be worth to have a wonderful dissertation on him. For me, he was extremely important, not only because this really revolutionary idea to write at the end of the 18th century an opera for machines, for telematic or machines, televisual machines, but because he also was playing wonderfully between sound and images and articulated his ideas between the different forms of expression which had become basic for time-based media and everything which is so valuable to us today. I could have also dedicated the lecture to Bertalan Szegedy, whom I found researching chronophotography, Etienne Jules Marie, Muybridge, and others. Miklós definitely helped me also to find some more material about him. I was very, very happy just a few months ago when we had been in Vienna in a very interesting exhibition about the interrelation of photography and painting. For me at least, at the first time in Vienna, he was appearing in this exhibition with some, with quite a few objects with his paintings, and especially with his studies of motion. Datalan Szegedy, a wonderful, let's say, not predecessor, I don't like this term at all, but a wonderful early artistic researcher. Nowadays this kind of term is very common to us and it's used everywhere, artistic research. But this is exactly what these people were doing. In an artistic way they were researching various phenomena, in this case for example motion and the structures of motion and what you can do out of that. Of course I could have also dedicated my short talk to Deneš von Mihály and his Teleor from 1924, which played an important role in the Audiovisions book, which Miklós mentioned so nicely. This was one of the really very interesting televisual devices from the 1920s for many reasons. One reason which impressed me always a lot was this huge amount of technology which was necessary to produce a tiny little image. That was the R, the monitor. It was not bigger than a stamp, and the whole machinery which you can see around was necessary to generate this electronic image. Deneš von Mihály was an electronic, the Teleor was an electronic device, whereas many of the early television experiments have been still done with mechanical electrics, as many of you know. Another hero for us in studying the archaeology of art and media within the last decades, of course, is Nemes Tamer. The book was translated into English. I fell over it many years ago at the Technical University in Berlin, because it was translated nearly immediately after 1967 into German in the former GDR, VEB, Berlin, DDR, something like that. And so it was available for us as students at the Technical University in Berlin. And for those of you who know this book, this is still, when you open it, a wonderful adventure and experience, because he goes through, I don't know, perhaps altogether 40 or 50 different modes of intelligent machines and machine intelligence. Amongst them, for example, Pepys' machine for composing music, which Pepys did not invent by himself, unfortunately, but this is not such a problem. This is the business of media archaeology. This machine, how you can see it here, was basically conceptualized by Athanasius Kircher in the middle of the 17th century, a composing machine which was part of Athanasius Kircher's Musurgia Universalis from 1650. But the whole book is a huge lexicon for studying in a very early stage this idea and the concept of intelligent machines and machine intelligence, which nowadays, as we all know, are so powerful and have become so important. In Karlsruhe, I was just able to install a first professorship at our art school for machine intelligence. It was taken over by Matteo Paschinelli. So this is 67. We could have started with that already in the art schools and in the universities, but we were not far enough yet. So these were possible dedications. Of course, I could have also dedicated the talk to Gabor Bodi and to many of the contemporary artists in Hungary, which I admire, whom I admire so much. Why I always felt so good here in Budapest, in working with Miklós, with Zoltán and all the other friends, was based on something which we did not need to express, because we simply shared it as a basic attitude towards life and towards arts and towards what we were doing. And this is perhaps wonderfully summed up in these 3 words, which you can read here on the roof of my old institute in Berlin. Kunst muss nicht. Art does not have to. We are living in a, not only in Hungary, in many other countries, in Germany, in England, in Holland, we are living in a very, very special situation. The last refugia, the last fields which are not occupied yet by technocratic, political, economical power, are more and more integrated into effective machines, and it's very difficult to still keep the possibility spaces, how I call the art schools, the possibility spaces, the spaces for possibilities open, and develop them further. And this is the reason why I put these letters on the roof of our building. You might imagine what this means. We did this project together with the artist Achim Monet a few years ago. Meanwhile, of course, this is picked up by the Google cameras, and whenever the Google cameras are floating over the roofs of our building, you can read these sentences. So if people are looking for our art school in Berlin, they first read these letters. And this was a wonderful project. By the way, I called this institute House Salomon, which of course refers to Francis Bacon's famous House of Salomon, the house of lies and of illusions. Art does not have to. We intuitively were able to work together with C-Cubed, with the Intermedia department and many partners and friends in the world, because intuitively we shared some paradigms of dealing with history and with the present and with possible futures. These 4 quasi-paradigms might help us to understand this context. In researching art and archaeology and history of the arts and media and technology, we tried not to be Eurocentristic, but to think mondial. One of the biggest challenges you will see, I not use the term global, but mondial. If we have time, we can talk about that later, why I use this term and not globality. We worked and will carry on to work universal instead of, not universal, sorry, but multifarious. A very important juxtaposition. Universalization, as we can see at the moment, is one of the most dangerous tendencies. Also, sometimes it looks different. And of course, we have to prevent the basic anthropocentric approach towards the world. We have to learn to think and act cosmic, which is extremely difficult and much easier to say than to do. And regarding the histories we are dealing with, we have to work multilinear and dynamic and not monolinear. And these are a selection of paradigms which we shared right from the beginning and which made our cooperations so easy. What I'm doing within the next minutes is something I never did before. At first I wanted to talk about really a different subject, especially the themes I'm dealing with at the moment, preparing a large exhibition on Ramon Lull, and Ramon Lull's idea of working between the three monotheological religions, the Muslims, the Jews and the Christians, and creating intelligent machines to communicate between the three different religions. For those of you who know history a little bit, you know that we are talking about the 13th century when we are talking about Ramon Lull and not about the present. And he's a wonderful example to question if we are now living at a point of time which is the most progressed time. My thesis in my unarchaeological approach is that in the past there have been constellations which were much more progressed than those we are going through today, but this of course is a very long discussion. I decided finally to make this little experiment also for myself, which is sliding along the danger to becoming peinlich, as we say in German, fragmentary anarchic self-portrait, which can of course completely fail. But let's try. I think you have the right who this person is, whom you give this wonderful Anna, this wonderful doctorship and professorship. And I try to explain that a little bit and combine it with basic ideas we were trying to develop as responsible professors, as responsible researchers in the work with young people for the last decades. Miklós mentioned various institutions I was working for, founding, establishing, but perhaps the most important institution for the development of my intellectual life was when I was very, very young and went to Berlin and started to study at an institute for language in a technical age. It was founded by a poet named Walter Höllerer and a professor of literature named Walter Höllerer, and his assistant at the beginning was Friedrich Knilli, an Austrian specialist for radio play and literature and poetry. And from them I learned all the basics which have become then so crucial for my later work. But why I show you this slide, this is one slide from around meanwhile 14,000 overhead projector files which I have, which construct my unarchive. Behind this file is the idea where what we call media art, or what we called for a while media art, was generated from, and what kind of traditions it had. At the beginning, we were fighting a lot with art critiques and with people who were criticizing us because there was a big misunderstanding. There was always this misunderstanding that what we call media art was mainly coming out of the tradition of painting and of sculpturing. This was wrong, and this is also one reason why these institutions who were starting within the framework of classes of painting and of sculpturing had so many difficulties. The origins, if we may use this word for lack of time, the origins were poetry and music. This was very important. Poetry and music, poetry as performed lyrics, time-based, and of course music, the mother of time-based arts. These were the most important reference right from the beginning. And in Berlin, at this Institute for Language in a technological or technical age, you could see that and study that very narrow. 1961 it was founded. The background was a very strong institute for musical acoustic and electronic radio experiments, experimental poetry, experimental theater, all time-based forms of arts, and not primarily image-orientated arts, but sound, lyrics, language played an extremely important role. Computer linguistics was founded around that time, and as you know, studying media at that time, studying cinema, for example, was mainly semiotics, and semiotics, of course, was framed within the study of linguistics, and this was what was so relevant for us. A few hundred kilometers away, Max Spencer was experimenting with interpreting texts and describing aesthetical text structures via programs, via informatics. His famous book from 1960, Programming of Beauty, was some kind of a blasphemic attack against hermeneutics, and caused a lot of rumor. Max Spencer, who wrote his dissertation on quantum physics and relativity of being, you can see he tried to combine a critique of Heidegger with quantum mechanics in his dissertation of 1936. I mean, this is extremely early, and still this text is nearly completely unknown. At the moment I'm trying to translate some of these very early texts to English and to publish them with an American university publishing house, the Minnesota University Press, to make all this material available, because it's completely unknown, and most of the younger scholars nowadays think that all these things have been invented after 1980 or 1990, when the internet arrived. To go back to this short fragments of a self-portrait, when I started to teach in Salzburg in Austria and built up a studio for audiovisuals there, I made a suggestion to the students which had enormous effect. I said, masters, professors are not falling from the sky. They are generated through time, and they need a lot of time to become what they are. So ask all your professors, your film professors, your painting professors, and so on, all your masters, to show you the first piece they have ever produced, and we make a festival out of that. It was very, very interesting. We prepared this festival, and we showed all the firsts by all the professors at that time in Austria. I remember very well one of the films of one of the now very important professors, I don't tell you the name, was shown, and after it was shown, he was of course present. He said, sorry, this was shown backwards from back to the front, but nobody really realized it. So these were the kind of discussions we had, and it was a wonderful start to come into terms with the students and to develop their own work and their own ideas. Of course, when you are 19 or 20 or 21 or 22, you have an enormous respect towards this masters, which is okay, but it can also be very problematic for your own development. This was my first Studentenwerk, my first student work, 1972, which was published. I did a lot of other things, of course, but this was the first published work, 1972. I mean, this is pretty long ago. I don't even want to think about it. Of course, it was Agifrop. It was a program I wrote. This seriography was going with a manifest-like text towards a materialist media studies. I have to explain that a little bit. For us at that time, Althusser was very important, because he presented some kind of a enlightened materialism, and Marxism. And we read his text and we liked him very much, especially for myself, was this term aleatoric materialism extremely interesting, which I used later then also when I went through my archaeological diggings and the material and tried to build collisions of the different kind of material, tension strips out of the different kinds of material. Althusser was always present, and it went back to this time. The basic or the most important medium with which we worked in this very, very early stage was radio. We had access to it, we had tape recorders, we could experiment with it, and we could make our own programs, and we discussed all these things a lot also with professional radio makers, radiophonic artists, however you want to name them. This is one of the very early texts I wrote a little bit later, 1974, 1975, together with two friends. I was studying here in the, I don't know, 4th or 5th semester or something like that. And this is an early text on what nowadays is called hacker movement. When you can read German, you can read perhaps some bits of the text. Once I would like to broadcast. Once I would like to stand behind the microphone and broadcast and not just receive what others are broadcasting. This is basically the idea of the hacker. I want to generate my material by myself. I want to rule the forms and the aesthetical output and not the machine which is hegemonically dominating me. This text, which was 70 pages long, it was nearly a little book, caused a lot of rumor. This was Cold War in Germany. It was forbidden finally. The catalog in which it was published was very popular. It had, I think, 9 editions with really many thousands of copies. But after the 3rd edition, our text was taken out because at the end we asked people to listen to a special radio station, Radio der Freiheit 29,8, 29.8, and this was Radio of Freedom and so on, and this was the broadcasting station which John Hartfield referred to in his very famous poster, you know that, with the fist, with the erected fist and the radio waves around it. And so it was a communist broadcasting station. This was enough in 1974-75 to say, no, we don't want this text. This was Berlin, West Berlin, in the 1970s, Cold War. You had to be very careful what you write. Of course, they wanted to republish the text, but the price was very high. We should have taken out this last sentence, where we asked for listening to this radio station. And of course we did not. Not only because we were so young. I think acted the same way today. Radio as the most important medium for us, extremely important. Bertolt Brecht and his first interactive radio experiment from 1929. I have a very rare archaeological finding. This is the piece which Hermann Scherchen was directing in 1929. The music was composed by Kurt Weill and Paul Hindemith, as most of you know. I just play 2 or 3 minutes because here Brecht provided us with something which really became for a while quite important for us. Here is the apparatus, here is the apparat, the identification with machines as a form of utopia. This was extremely important. We believed in the idea, which also Flusser articulated several times, that machines might do it better than humans, because humans failed so much during the Second World War and in the Holocaust, and Brecht was helping us a lot to aesthetically understand.
Aufforderung an die amerikanischen Flieger, den Ozean zu überfliegen.
Please give me a signal if you think I should stop right now. Seriously parallel with this utopian idea about the machine was the studying of what you can call, or what is nowadays also called, the propaganda machine. We just recently, some weeks ago, made a public discussion in Karlsruhe where this term propaganda machine played a very important role. It was about net activism and net popularism. All these developments in the internet, which we follow with a lot of astonishment at the moment and a lot of sorrow, of course. Propaganda machine, propagandistic machine, these were terms which interested us a lot in the 1970s because in Germany and in West Berlin there was a strong neo-Nazistic movement again, and we did not understand why this happened again as young people, and we started to study in a very, very severe way the machinery of propaganda during the 1930s and 1940s. I remember that I looked at this film, Jew Süß, one of the most well-known anti-Semitic films in the history. I think I looked at it 70 times, 75 times, and we made protocols. We recorded every single millimeter of this film in our brains and in the brains of others. This was extremely important to understand it and to understand how the machinery worked. And also we were dealing, of course, with the most cruel part of the history we have as Germans co-generated, so to speak, or generated the Holocaust. This was end of the 70s, the time when this American television series came on the international market, and we made a long research project over 3 years. And this book was the result, one of 3 books we produced around this theme, Holocaust for Entertainment, Anatomy of an International Bestseller. This strange paradox interrelations of an aesthetics of commodities and propaganda was in the focus of our studies. This coincidence and this coexistence of aesthetics of commodity and propaganda and ideology, which you can see now in very, very actual media phenomena a lot. Part of these studies were taboo zones, like pornographic films. This is a film by Lasse Braun from the early 1970s, where fascist symbols were used to attract the German audience, a special part of the German audience, of course. And we also did not stop there, where actual youth movements like the very early punk movements were starting to play with Nazistic symbols to provoke, to make statements, very problematic, and we had very extremely critical discussions, not only on the music but also on the forms of their appearances. A next step, I have to hurry up a little bit, was to explore in a more dense way the idea of the utopia of the machine. And I think the important change of paradigms, I learned at least at that time, was that machines, of course, are not determining aesthetics or politics or ideology or whatever, but they are co-writing, co-authoring the things we are judging as aesthetical phenomena, for example. Of course, the reading of Nietzsche, but also reading Michel Foucault and the apparatus theoreticians like Hakyung Cha, Jean-Louis Baudry, Jean-Louis Comolli, Plenet, helped a lot to understand that. And I think up to today, this idea is carrying my work at least, and also as far as I can judge it, Miklós' work very strongly. We respect the other as machines, but we also know, of course, that they are not working deterministic in relation to culture, but we have an interrelation between programs, between machinery and imagination and fantasia, and we cannot think in determinations, we can only think in these kind of non-trivial relationships between the two. This was driving the work very strongly for the next decades and led finally also to my dissertation. This is one of the very early videotape recorder machines from 1955 from the Radio Corporation of America. You can see these kind of machineries were hegemonial apparatuses. We needed, of course, different forms like these mobile machines close to the body to a little bit later generate some kind of a subversive praxis, artistic practices with these new technologies. Technomobility 1967, this is the famous Sony Portopack, which functioned like many mobile devices. Nowadays you could make very easily film recordings, you could see them, look at them immediately, could edit them, and you could distribute them for others and discuss them with others. The interfering tactics and strategies into the existing media, like we learned from Brecht, from Benjamin and from others, played an important role for our early experimental practices, and we learned, of course, also from other groups in the United States of America and Italy, Video Guerrilla. I took out this slide because in Karlsruhe we just dedicate a whole exhibition to the Rain Dance Corporation, also meanwhile nearly forgotten. For example, Ira Schneider, who was one protagonist of this Rain Dance Corporation, published in the late 1960s, early 1970s, Radical Software, a magazine which was discussing also these early video tactics and video strategies. Rain Dance Corporation, the situation about this kind of material is like that today. Perhaps I should tell this little anecdote. Rain Dance Corporation left something like 180 videotapes, and there is no institute in the world which can still digitize all this material. The ZKM is the only institution which has all the machines, all the recorders, all the players which are necessary to save this kind of archive for the future, and that's what we are just doing, and we use the exhibition to make it actual. I hope I have this time, because this is something I never showed before. During this period, studying the early video movement and being at the same time part of it, I was also teaching at the Technical University a lot in Berlin. And together with the students we developed a tactics of researching and exploring at this time new media, which was very unusual. We made films without camera. We used material which we found, electronic material, and the students montaged their own how should I call it, films, videos out of it. The remarkable thing about is that we were developing this praxis as an expanded hermeneutics, as I called it, an expanded hermeneutics which was trained in the confrontation with machines and software. I show you one of these pieces. I think it must have been around 1984, 85 or something like that. Just a few seconds. Everything handmade, everything handmade. Einstürzende Neubauten, new collapsing building of course. So this was just, as I said, handmade. There was no automatic editing machines at that time, and you had to do everything frame by frame. This was not so easy for the students, but of course we all learn a lot about the construction of electronic images, about the construction of visual arguments and so on, practicing that. We made many videos like that. Sometimes also, you know that very well, Miklós, for economic reasons, because we didn't have the cameras. we couldn't afford the cameras, so we used what we had and what we found and made something out of it, made something different out of it. And this approach is still relevant up to today. This was not relevant, the lack of material and money, a little bit later when I started in Cologne and built up as a founding rector, this Academy of Arts and Media. One of the first productions we made, Miklós might remember, was Ex Machina in Charleroi, together with Plessy, the Italian video artist, and Flamand, who was a choreographer, who worked with the group Plan K. It was amazing when I looked through this material recently again, and some of the scenes, some of the dramaturgical elements we built at that time, how actual this material was. I just show you a very short extract, and I leave the comment and the connection, the associations with today to you. I won't comment on that. The other side of this highly aesthetical material, which was constructed in cooperation with musicians, of course, in this part of this used music section. Parallel to that, strategies, tactics, again, of interfering into existing media structures were extremely important for our academy and for teaching at the academy and for learning at the academy. This was one of the most perhaps provocative pieces, and my first diploma I took in Cologne in 1993-94. The students were one Norwegian and one Canadian, Kurt Wolfert and Stanley Stahl. They created a leathern suit with electric sensors, which you could steer via ISDN line from a different city, from a different place, telematically, and attract similar attractions like erotic feelings. This was at least the plan. The project was highly discussed. It was really a public performance project and helped us a lot to understand at this time in 1993-94 the limitations of the internet. What you can discuss in the internet, what you cannot discuss in the internet. At this time, Miklós might remember, I wrote a text 1994, 7 items on the internet, where I was mainly discussing what is not appearing in the net. And used this as a tactics, the absent in the internet as a tactics to talk about the net. The critical discourse was absolutely clearly there already in the early 90s on the net. But of course we were artists, we were dealing with arts, we were shown in exhibitions, and we were discussing in small symposia and small conferences, and the mass media is nowadays repeating that in a very specific way, or they are simply moaning about the lack of critique. And this is of course complete nonsense, because the young artists took the risks in the early 90s already to discuss all this material very critically. Nobody Research was one of the icon groups for this period of time with their large format performances and installations, collaborative software. 1995, this was their piece on the Antarctic, which was one of the diploma works. Also we did complex techno environments steered via programs and computer machines. And I jump perhaps towards the end of my period in Cologne, which was for me also an important cut in my thinking and in the development of my ideas on the interrelations between art and technology. A short extract from an opera which 3 students produced, Begulin Orpheus. This is an adaptation of Gluck's famous opera, which you all know. The 3 students were 2 Russians and the former grand niece from Tesla, Maya Illich. I just show you this very, very short extract. Everything is code, apart from the singer. Very simple. The students wanted to create an opera out of the suitcase, as we call it. Opera is large production facilities which you need to bring an opera on the stage. With the help of digital technology, they said we can do that in a very small version, very cheap. The only non-coded material which you have perceived now at the moment was the singing of the singer. Everything else was code, nothing else. The whole pictures, the images, everything was just generated by the computer, and you could really take this opera in a suitcase and bring it to another place and perform it there with a good singer. We did it several times as an experiment, and it worked very well. Of course, I mixed here 2 pieces together. So I just deconstructed the music a little bit. This was a point when I thought, okay, the idea that the digital can serve as the last analogon to the alchemist formula for gold has reached its climax. We can't go further to that. You can do nearly everything which used to be impossible with the digital. And this was the cut I was talking about already. I started to think very strongly about what comes next, what kind of art practices will come after the media have become systemic and part of our daily infrastructure. I started at this time also to collect images of gravestones where the digital already was celebrated. This one, for example, says here, the end of life is the beginning of eternity. Das Ende des Lebens ist der Beginn der Ewigkeit. A very nice comment on the ionic dimension of time, which is beyond our perception, this ionic dimension opposite Kairos and Chronos. The ion has this dimension of eternity, and this is very strongly connected, of course, to the idea of the eternal machine and everything which is connected with that. I have no time to go deep into that, but latest at the beginning of the new millennium, I started to think about the next steps, and I'm still working on that very much, and I'm working with new generations of artists which I enjoy a lot. This is one of the now most famous artists, perhaps. This is Julius von Bismarck, who studied with me and later with Olaf Eliasson, where he learned how to be a professional artist. But I think many other things he learned with me. This is a piece, for example, he did quite recently in 2014. This is, for me, a very good example for art after the media. Of course, everything Julius is doing has gone through the passage of advanced media, no doubt. There is nothing without media anymore, but the media themselves are not in the center of attraction anymore of these kind of pieces. It's very strongly here, in his case, also about computing the physical. This is a clock built by 12 mixers for concrete, and you can imagine that with every 5 minutes one of the machines starts. Sometimes they are all working together and make a hell lot of noise. It's a wonderful project. I also like the opposite project very much, which he developed in the years 2013, 2014. Some pigeons are more equal than others. The punks of the cities, the flying punks of the cities, he took this idea verbally and created a machine where he was dyeing pigeons, these ugly street pigeons in different cities of the world with wonderful colors, and then let them fly through the city. There's hardly anything anymore, obviously and explicitly, with computers and with screens or whatever, but of course many of the ideas behind this project are machine generated. Of course the colors they used, the paint they used was biological paint, and the pigeons did not die or did not hurt or whatever. When I think about the future, I did not want to present that in our conference, Miklós, in Karlsruhe, because it was your time, the guests' time to present their ideas and their work. I did not want to interfere with my own ideas too much into the conference. I have a lot of opportunities to do that in different situations. I started to develop for the last years faculties for a new school of arts and for new academies of arts. Faculties in the truest sense of the term, not in the sense of chairs of institutes which we have to build, but in the sense of qualities which we are longing for and which we would like to install in institutions to have some kind of a rumoring energies or living matters inside of our institutions. This list of possible faculties is growing, of course, and permanently also shifting and changing, but these are some which I started to install in specific ways. Dignity, the most important, Würde. I just talked with Miklós during a cup of coffee in the afternoon about that. The chair for dignity was one of the earliest chairs in Western Europe. It was founded in Scotland, in Glasgow, in the 14th century, and it's still existing. I was invited some years ago there to give some lectures. I was really amazed about this whole institution and what they are doing there. This brought me on this idea to integrate that into our field. Hospitality, Gastfreundschaft, so difficult to develop this kind of faculty and to really practice it in Europe and elsewhere. Behind these ideas, perhaps I should add that, otherwise you misunderstand me. Behind this idea is not that I don't want anything anymore which we connect with traditional art academies or universities. This stuff will exist all the time. Of course, we have to learn poetry, we have to learn linguistics, we have to learn engineering, we have to learn programming, and so on and so on. But the question is, what kind of faculties do we especially need to survive in the future and to make, to build, to generate something which we can really enjoy as life. Hospitality, unusual actions, ungewöhnliche Maßnahmen. It's very difficult for me to translate that into English. Unusual actions is something like that. Paleofuturism, that's what we are doing when we are working with our deep time machine and try to bring the phenomena of the past into the future. Pataphysic, I see a strong rebirth of pataphysical experiments at the moment everywhere in the world. We have to support that. It's an extreme joy, and we can learn a lot about the interrelations of art and technology. Of course, nobody talks about experiments anymore because we are all living in test departments now. Cultura experimentalis is something which we have to regenerate and to take care for. It's the most important little plant which needs our protection in art schools. The aesthetics of resistance, chaos pilots, kairos poets, non-censorable systems, the knowledge of the winds. If I would have gone to Hong Kong, which I did not do finally last year, I would have done a conference there on the knowledge of the winds and the necessity to relearn how to read winds and to read where they come from and where they go to. If we will not be able to redevelop this kind of cultural technology, we will have difficult times in a few decades. Of course, in this connection, navigations are extremely important as faculty, critical engineering, and so on. Skalierung, still one of the biggest problems, not only for artists and scientists, but also for people who are working in economics and politics. Usually they are building their things too small or too big. Skalierung is a very important challenge to learn about that. I could go on with this list, and I will go on with this list for the next years and decades. The other question is how we can play and play with these kind of faculties and bring them into connection and generate interrelated systems out of it. Modi operandi of these faculties. Of course, this is a very simple and very crude juxtaposition it's duopolistic. Forget about the comfortability of this kind of thinking. It only should help us to learn that for this faculty and playing with these faculties, it doesn't matter if the tools we are working with are analog or digital, are solitaire or netted, networked, are sounding or shining, are showing, or whatever, are physical or hypermaterial or imaginary or symbolic. This will work together as modi operandi and create the large field of art, design and thinking. This is, by the way, the title, the name, the working title for the new course I'm developing at the moment in Karlsruhe. I want to integrate all the different existing classes, all the different existing courses and Studiengänge, how do you say, courses, yes, into one art, design, thinking. Kunst, design, thinking. You can read that in different ways. This is okay. I have a lot of resistance at the moment with my older colleagues, but we are doing the experiment, and I hope that next year we will have this one integrated course where we don't differentiate anymore between critical thinking, experimental arts and design and all these fields, but bring them together as energy fields and with some rough orientations with the kind of faculties I've just showed you. Of course, poetical, critical intervening will definitely our most important activity. Thank you very much for your patience, for your long patience, and I'm sorry that I perhaps talked too long, but I'm not so often here, and so I used the time. Thank you very much. I should mention once more, please, which is very important, thanking Miklós and Zoltán and all his friends. One faculty I did not list, and it doesn't make sense as a faculty, but as Miklós knows, and as Zoltán knows, and Laszlo knows, I'm deeply believing only in one economy on this world. And this is the economy of friendship. It's the only economy which really is reliable and which really can work. Economy of friendship. Forget about all the other economies which are rumoring and are there, industrial economy and all the rest of it. The economy of friendship is the only one which works. This economy helps us not only to survive, but to develop a kind of presence in the field we are working in, which we really can enjoy. We are not asking about how effective it is and how much profit it brings. We are simply asking if it supports our friendship or not. Thanks.
Head of the doctoral school to provide the document